Boston. My name is Ruth Aguilera. I'm a professor at Northeastern, and we are gonna get started as as we are getting more registration. We're at 54 now. The first thing that I wanted to say, on behalf of Becca Quijo and Robin Chan at the office, Becca is a professor at the ILR School at Cornell. On behalf of the three of us, I welcome everybody. Just wanted to let you know that we have over 100 participants registered. 90% are women, so that's something that we are going to work in the future. And 10% are men, so welcome also to those men. 50% of our registered participants are from the US, 37% from Europe, and those the most Europeans are from the UK and from the Netherlands. But we have a wide diversity of people from Spain and Italy, etc. We have 7% in Asia, where now it's very late at night. So thank you all of those of you who are awake. And we also have some participants from Africa and from the Middle East. So welcome everybody. The first thing that I wanted to do before I introduce our distinguished panel is to thank Robin so much for helping us with this first webinar. And this is a little bit of continuation of the SMS Women's Network breakfast that we had. And related to that, one of the things that came up, in SMS membership is to create the role within SMS of the ombudsperson. So you will see here, participants, you will see here that we have Professor Dana Mimbaeva, who is a professor at Copenhagen Business School, and she's going to be our first SMS ombudsperson. And I want to give her a chance to not only introduce her, but also give her a chance, if you could tell us a little bit, in 1 minute about your role.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm super excited, and the as Ruth mentioned, the establishment of an ombuds role was something that came out as a recommendation of the Inclusiveness, Diversity and Inclusion Committee that we had at SMS a couple of years ago. And my role basically will be for the next 2 years to provide an alternative, additional, supplementary, complementary channel for the voices of SMSers, members of SMS community, and bring it forward to the board, and actually, and hopefully very much facilitate positive development and find new ways so that each and everyone feel included and welcome this SMS.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dana. We are very excited about this new position and, all the engagement that you will, the opportunity for engagement from the members. So without any further ado, let me introduce our distinguished panel that does not need a lot of introduction. And I will go in the order that we have advertised it. So, our first, we have 4 panelists. They are all females, and their names are Professor Anne Langley from HEC Montreal, Professor Marie-Louise Morse from the Copenhagen Business School, Professor Sharon Alvarez from the University of Pittsburgh, and Professor Tammy Madsen from the University of Santa Clara University. And, we're fortunate that all these people do not really need much introduction, but Becca and I invited these panelists because they're all very successful from our point of view, yet they have very different paths on their careers, and their background, their careers, and the choices that they have made in their life. So before I turn it to start the webinar, which is, we expect that it's going to be around 45 minutes, before I turn it to Becca, who's going to ask the first question to all the panelists, I wanted to just share with you some of the technology kind of three rules. The first one is that all the panelists, all the participants are muted. So all the questions, so participants, if you go at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. So at some point, there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So that's going to be the venue, in addition to the questions that many of you have sent from the registration. Second, So you are muted, but you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. And the last thing is that we're going to have 2 polls. And we're going to start with the first poll now, which Robin is going to pull out for you. And, you know, this is the first time that we do a webinar. So the first poll is, if you could ask this question, which is, how many years has it been since you started your PhD? And now I'm going to turn it to Becca, so you can, you know, once you answer that, you can remove it from your screen, or Becca, maybe Robin removes it. So we're going to turn it to Becca, and the order that we're going to follow is, we're going to start with Anne, the first question, then Luis, basically the order that we have announced the panelists, Anne, Marie-Louise, Sharon, and Tammy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's a great segue into our first question, which is really at the heart of the webinar. And what we'd like to ask is, for each panelist, what does success mean to you? And how did you come to identify and embrace this personal definition of success?
Okay, is it my turn?
It is.
Okay, can everyone see me and hear me? Yeah, so thank you everyone for inviting me to this panel. So I'm going to try and address the question. I have to say I don't think about success every day. Maybe that's because it's a strange concept. So I thought about it before this webinar, but not so much necessarily before that. So I think that being successful means being happy in what you're doing. So there's a very intrinsic aspect to it. I think for me, I need to feel that I master the work that I do, and that it uses any talents that I have well. So for me, that's success. I need to feel also that I'm proud of what I do. So if you're not proud, that makes you feel really terrible. And it is also important that other people recognize that as well. So if they don't recognize it, then that's very, very tough. And how did I come to that kind of perspective? I think I have a background in mathematics, and my first, I did a PhD, an MSc in operations research, and my first jobs were in that field. And yeah, I didn't think I was particularly good at it. And so I needed to do something different. So I went to do a PhD. I was kind of attracted to that because my husband also has a PhD, and he seemed to enjoy it. And in doing that, I discovered qualitative research, which is where I kind of position myself. And I started to feel that I was more comfortable in doing it, and did more of it, and that makes you feel more successful. So I think it's a learning process. You know, you do stuff, it doesn't make you feel good, and so you don't do it anymore. You do something different, or it doesn't make you feel good the first time, but you learn something so that the next time it does make you feel better. I mean, there is this. I can remember the terrible time when I had my first graduate student, and I felt so incompetent. And I was trying to pretend to the the graduate student that I knew what I was doing, but actually not. And at some point I realized that that's fine. And then you start to feel more comfortable about doing it. So it's a learning process, trying to find the things where you think you can make a contribution, and do more of them, and do less of the things that make you feel miserable.
Thank you.
And it's
go ahead.
not money, by the way. I mean, success for me is not about having the biggest salaries. It's about being happy.
I think that's important. I think it's also important, in addition to thinking about what success means to us, part of that is also what does success not necessarily mean. So it's a good point. Louise?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I can definitely, all of Anne's thoughts resonate with me. And I got this invitation to participate in this, and I thought, I don't necessarily consider myself very successful, but I do consider myself very fortunate. And I think that is very similar to feeling happy in what you do. And then I thought about, why do I feel very fortunate? Well, I think that's because I'm working in a profession that I really enjoy. And I work with things that I can work on research ideas that I find interesting and exciting. I enjoy my teaching, so I can engage with the students in a positive way. And then I surround myself with people, be it my colleagues at the institution I'm at, or with my co-authors that I enjoy spending time with. And I think as Anne also was maybe pointing to, that definition of success or feeling of being fortunate in what I do has, of course, changed a little bit, because I think at the outset of my career, I felt my success would very much be measured by the institution I was working at, or how many papers I would publish, or how many citations I would get. And I think that's not how I think about it today. I do think about it, right now I'm happy at where I'm at, and that has to do with being part of a research environment that I enjoy working in. I enjoy the classes that I teach, and I have good co-authors, and that might be a Copenhagen Business School. I can't predict if 10 years from now that's going to be a Copenhagen Business School or it's going to be somewhere else. So I think this feeling of being part of a profession, which is not just defined by the job that you're in right now, but it could be another job 10 years down the road, or maybe 7, 8 years behind me. When I was at London Business School, I was also happy at that institution. Now, how did I come to think about that definition of success? Well, I think one of my mentors said to me, look, Louise, you have to understand that most people don't get tenure the first place they go to. And I think so much of our career is driven by this focus on getting tenure, and therefore the count of publications and the citations. And I think once that person made me realize that, I thought, well, if that's not what I'm trying to achieve, then I can actually focus much more on just being interested in the research that I'm working on. And if I do a good job and enjoy what I do, then I actually also become successful in pursuing that. And so I think that's really important to think about, because I sometimes have junior faculty come to me and say, oh, I'm so worried about tenure. And many of them, I ask them, look, do you imagine yourself spending your whole career, right? We have long careers. Do you want to spend that time at the same institution? And I think some people do want to spend all those years at the same institution, but many of us come into this profession thinking that we might not necessarily stay in the same place, because we are part of a larger community as a profession.
Thanks. Sharon?
Good morning. I too would like to thank you guys for this question. Such a great question, because it really forced me to reflect, right? Because just as our previous panelists, it never once occurred to me I was successful, right? It occurs to me that I'm fortunate, I'm blessed, like all those things, but successful, I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. But for me, what I am is I'm interested, I'm engaged, and I'm learning. And I have to always be learning. In fact, I'll admit so I didn't want to go into corporate America because I didn't think I'd have the same opportunities to learn that I would have if I stayed in academia. And that's what's always attracted me to this profession. We're all engaged in learning, and every day is a new day, and our research questions are new questions, and the research evolves, and we get to evolve with it. And what I love about this profession is exactly that. It isn't just kind of what we're doing in isolation, and everybody's talked about it so far, but it's our interaction with each other. And so I am who I am because of all the people I've had the opportunity to interact with. And they've made me better, and hopefully I've made them better as we've gone along. You know, it was so funny because I was reading this thing, how did you come to identify? I don't think I ever identified anything, right? You know, I just sort of bumbled along, really. But, you know, over time, you create who you are, you create your environments. You know, kind of what Anne said, you know, I really resonated with that, in that, you know, I do something and either it worked or it didn't work. And if it didn't work, I'm like, okay, well, let's figure out, you know, what our next step is going to be. I think it's important to be resilient in this business. And all the women that make it, look across the board. They're all very resilient women, right? Because everybody's smart, right? In this profession, everybody's smart. So we clear that hurdle. And so then it's like, well, what do you do going forward? Well, you work hard, you're resilient, you're right. So I just think I bungled along, and here I am, and all of a sudden someone asked me why I was successful, and I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about it. It hadn't even occurred to me. So I appreciate the question, and like I said, it was a journey. It was a journey.
So Tammy, before we jump over to you, I want to share a comment on what we've heard so far, and that's as somebody who's not quite early, but somewhere in the middle of my career. Sometimes I struggle with thinking about, should I have some curated version of kind of how I got to where I am now and where I'm going in the future? And I think I always looked up to more senior scholars who I always viewed like all of our panelists that I view as very successful, and think that they must have something. You must have something that I'm missing in terms of that sort of, this is exactly where I want to be at a particular point in time. And so it's actually a little refreshing to hear that maybe that's not always the case, and maybe you can get to where all of you are without having that from the outset. Tammy, would you like to share?
Sure. I mean, I agree with everything that others have commented on. I'm sort of fortunate, lucky. This combination of sort of serendipitous type of opportunities. And I think that for me, the basics and what we started with was having my family, or my husband, my spouse, healthy and happy, and being in a context where that's possible. So that sort of makes a big difference. If we're not in a good space in terms of that happiness, then everything else doesn't really fall into place. But this question was pretty difficult for me because, again, much like the other panelists, I don't think of this success, and it's not sort of something that I'm engaged in on a daily basis saying, oh, what have I achieved? But I do have, I think all of us probably have some principles that guide our behavior, and that's kind of what I'm hearing, right? And I, you know, much like the others, I started out this career because I was working in as a manager at GM, and I thought, oh my God, there has to be a better way to run an organization. And I was getting very bored. So, so for me, thinking about this was more about, well, what's the conduct that I engage in on a daily basis that keeps me going, that keeps me happy, that check myself to ensure that I'm doing what I want to do. And I think the first thing is really sort of, am I making a difference? And not just for my students, but also the roles that I'm playing for organizations, right? So if I'm a rep at large for AOM, am I making a difference for the membership? Am I able to make a difference in my role for SRF? So those kinds of things. Am I helping my students outside of the classroom? Because those things are kind of rewarding, and they're sort of a reflection back of our day-to-day kind of activities. A second piece is you know, I'm not sort of a saint, I'm not perfect, but I try to sort of think about, am I working with integrity, with honesty, and with ethics, and sort of everything that I do? And you know, it's we try and maintain these values in our personal interactions, but also in teaching and in research. So not taking shortcuts, you know, not harking, not data mining, you know, trying to be a rational reviewer, those kinds of things. So can I live up to those standards on a regular basis? And I think, and sometimes those kinds of things are not really easy to do, right? So we've all been in meetings where it's gotten contentious, and it's sort of difficult not to react. And so I have a couple things that I do to try to keep myself in check so that I'm managing my behavior. And one of them is, I have this question that I ask myself, which is, what would Andre Delbecq do? And if you didn't know Andre was a fellow of the Academy, and he was the founder of the Management Spirituality division within the AOM, and he had this calm, insightful presence at meetings, and he had this way, which I call a superpower, of reframing the negative into the positive and getting everybody moving in a certain direction. And so, you know, if I'm in those moments, I sort of, well, what would Andre do? Would he respond? How would he respond? So trying to sort of manage that, because as I think as you evolve in your careers, you're getting asked to do a lot more things. You might be engaged in a lot of different interactions, and sometimes in situations that are just incredibly uncomfortable. And then I don't see myself in terms of my research trajectory. There's a long way to go still in terms of thinking about success in that space, but I think I've gotten better at choosing what to do and what not to do, and reminding myself I don't have the luxury of taking that on, or I do have the luxury of taking something on. And then something that sticks with me that a mentor had said a long time ago was, are you working well, or are you just working, right? So we can get sort of, we can grind away and spend a lot of time on a project and not be as productive as we would like, and other times that just clicks and things move forward. So I try to be very mindful of how I'm getting my work done and moving forward. You know, impact, that's a whole sort of other kind of conversation. I think of impact more broadly, not so much just citations or counts, but sort of what's the community and organizations that we're having an influence on. And this all has evolved over time, right? This is not something that I started out as a naive doctoral student, sort of knowing exactly what my path would be, but a lot of learning along the way, and hopefully continuing to do that going forward.
Thank you. Thank you for getting us started. So thank you so much. Now you can see in the screen, I hope all the participants can also see that we have, you know, we have 32% of participants who, so the most participants are, you know, either they're probably PhD students or assistant professors. So you can see here a little bit the distribution. All right, so now we're gonna turn it, we're gonna continue, we're gonna ask another question to the participants, and we'll ask the same question to the panelists. So Robin, if you could please pull up. So for the participants, so we're kind of turning a little bit to the dark side. And if you could, for the participants, if you could identify what is the biggest barrier in your efforts to achieve your academic goals that lead to happiness, success, and feeling accomplished. So we have six possible options: competencies and skills, financial resources, personal demands, politics, professional responsibilities, or social emotional support. And I will turn this question to our panelists, and it could be a plural. What is the biggest barrier you face or you have faced in the past in your efforts to achieve success? And I hope those 6 possible answers give you a little bit of a prompt of things to think about. So at this time, we're gonna let you take the order that you like, or we can go back to Anne. Okay.
I think we should start with somebody else.
Yeah, so who wants to pick up? Sharon?
So I knew you were gonna go to me. It's like, okay, I'll be number 1. You know, I don't think anything externally has been a barrier to my success. I think where I get stuck is when internally and externally I feel doubt or uncomfort. And what I've really started to learn, and this kind of goes back a little bit, I think, to something Tammy said that sparked that thought in me. Whenever I'm feeling doubtful or I'm feeling uncomfortable, It's because I know that what I want to do internally and whatever is going on externally isn't matching up. And so what I need to do is, when I feel that way, it's like, okay, how do I get that to match? What is it? Is it my internal expectation is wrong? Or, what is it that's going on? And so, I really strive to get my internal and external to feel like I'm matching. And if I can get to that point, there are no barriers, right? Because that's the beauty of our profession. Our profession, there's not a lot of barriers. We tend to be our own barriers oftentimes. And so I try to get those things to match up. I try to get my internal doubts to go away. And if I can get that to happen, then I'm in great shape.
Okay, great, thank you. So congruence, kind of. Next person.
Oh wait, and I think I resonate with what Sharon's saying. I think we can be our own barrier, right? We can constrain ourselves quite a great deal. We can do things sort of doubt ourselves, but we also beat ourselves up about sort of things. And so getting over that is sort of quite critical. And then within organizations, I think it's important to figure out what's the path that you can navigate. If you're finding a barrier, how do you manage around that? Right. So if there's someone that's constraining your ability to do something, are there people that you can talk to and sort of figure out another way sort of to move through? So I'm not saying sort of plow through the hierarchy by any means, but carefully sort of navigating around what are the constraints. And I think I had more constraints in corporate America. We certainly have clear hurdles within the academic set, but I think there's also all kinds of room to do what you want to do and to carve out your own space. So.
Okay, thank you. Luis.
Yeah, no, I find it difficult also to answer on that list of options that you had. I think the constraints also change over time, because I think early on in my career, I felt constrained by the pressure on you have to publish this number of publications to get tenure. And I think for me, again, this insight, most people don't get tenure the first place they go. So it's actually okay if I don't just push for that and I focus on doing my research and doing a good job. I focus on my teaching. And maybe that's a bit of the disconnect that Sharon's talking about, but actually letting go of some of those external pressures and not putting those pressures on you, which in some sense just make you stressed and unhappy. Yes. But I think later on in my career, maybe I would say that there are some external constraints because I guess being fortunate, and if you do a good job at your institution, you get asked to do many things. And if you're a woman, Dana will know this, if you're a woman at CBS and there are not enough female professors, you get asked to sit in many committees or do many things. And you get asked to teach because you get better at teaching as you get into your career. And so you have to learn to say no. And then that version of success becomes a barrier because you end up having to do too many things. And sometimes I have to take a step back and say, okay, what is it that I want to spend my time on? And I do want to spend my time on doing research. I do want to spend some time in the classroom, but not so much that I can't do a good job there either. And I also want to connect with the community and do things outside of CBS. And so all of those things take up your time, and there's only so much time in a day. And I also want to spend time with my family outside of work. As Tammy said, that's also really important for you to be at a place where you feel happy. So that's also been really important to me. Yeah.
So two important takeaways so far, prioritize, and decide what is really a barrier and what is not a barrier, and then design a path that can help you, maybe you will not fully overcome that barrier, but at least manage, like a stakeholder managing the external stakeholders, but at least being aware and manage. And then the other thing that came up from the three of you is sometimes how to learn, how to say no, how to learn to say no. So let's maybe go back to that, but let me turn to Anne and see if you want to talk about.
I have very similar responses. I mean, I think my barriers to success are my own limitations. There are some things I am not so good at, and so you have to find ways to not be the main thing in your life. So I found teaching quite difficult when I started out, and I had to learn my way into the style that suited me. And I found it, but it took a while. And so your own limitations kind of have a role in that. And also I say yes to far too many things, and sometimes to the wrong things. I say yes to things where then it becomes a duty rather than a pleasure. And you know that you're probably not achieving what could be achieved by someone else who took on that thing, or if it was a better project or something. So that can sometimes be a frustration where you feel that you must, but maybe it's not the best thing.
Yeah.
You know, that's an example, though, of what I feel is, you know, my inside and my outside's not quite matching up, right? We know when we say yes to something that doesn't resonate with us, right? And yet we do it, and then we go and we resent it, right? And we resent the people that asked us, and we resent ourselves, and right? And so I just think it's getting that match, that, and that's hard. That's really hard, because, you know, if you had asked me this even a year ago, I would have said, oh, what a selfish thing. But in fact, it's not selfish. It really is how you do the best you can do, is by having that internal match. Whatever you say yes to, the minute you feel uncomfortable internally, you should backtrack, you know, and say, no, I changed my mind, you know. Do it quickly. Don't do it late. Do it fast.
All right, very good. Very good tip. Thank you to all of you to say yes to this, because it's very important.
This is a pleasure.
And we ask you, and you say yes right away. So thanks a lot, because I think, you know, it shows that you prioritize. Any other tips about, you know, how to say no, like, and how to know when to say no? One is this gut feeling kind of test. Like, if it doesn't feel good, maybe it's not good.
Yeah, I think that there was an article a few years back, which was by a postdoc at Harvard. I think she was in biochemistry. She was in the sciences. And the way that she framed this was that you have a service budget, or you have a budget for a certain amount of things that you're going to do, and you allocate that budget on a quarterly basis or whatnot, right? So if you said, okay, this quarter I can allocate a certain number of hours to service, and once those hours are up, then if something comes along, you have to say to yourself, do I have the luxury of taking that other thing on, right? And if it's something you're incredibly passionate about, and it's going to sort of do a lot of, you know, meet your agenda in whatever way it does, that's one thing. But if it's something that sort of it's just another service obligation, and there's many other folks that could take this on within the institution, and then it's a no. I think I have not been good over time at saying no. I'm learning this process over time. It's picking and choosing. And I think as a junior faculty, one thing that I did do was, if someone asked me to do something, I would go to my chair and say, should this be something that I take on at this point in time? Right? Should I, or whoever your advisor or mentor is in your organization, because I think that makes a difference, and they'll let you know, right? They'll try to be helpful. Yes, this is a good idea. It's only going to take this amount of time, or no, you should not join that curriculum revision committee. That will be a time thing, right? So thinking carefully about someone asks you, pause. I think it's much more difficult if the president calls you at home and says, we need you to do this. Can you do this? Those kinds of situations are a little bit more challenging in terms of saying no. But smaller here.
If I could come in just briefly.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that service obligations are an area where we should probably say no more. But I would also say that this happens with research projects as well. I mean, I don't know how other people have fared with that, but sometimes I've said yes to research projects and regretted it, knowing that this is going to be hard, this is not going to give me pleasure, and knowing that what comes out of it is probably going to be okay, but not fantastic. So that's also another area where probably this is your own fault. Why don't you say no? You can always say no to a research project, but you can't. You have obligations, and students and situations that lead you to do things which perhaps not the best. So yeah, it's not just service.
Can I add? I think you're right, and that we say yes to things that we shouldn't say yes to. I think Tammy's advice is really well taken, because if we have a lot of junior faculty or PhD students who are listening in, I think asking a mentor for advice on when is it okay to say no to this opportunity or request, I think is helpful, because I think junior faculty need to say no much more often than senior faculty, because we sometimes have to say yes to things also to protect the more junior people in the profession or to help them out. So if someone in my department asks me to do anything that has to do with helping the PhD students, I am almost always saying yes, because I feel that's really important and it's my role to do that. Whereas there are other things that have to do with helping the dean with something where I feel like, no, you can ask someone else. So it depends on the request, but I think that's maybe easier later in the career to figure out what do I say yes, what do I say no to, whereas early in the career that can be more difficult.
So actually, I have found it to be the reverse. So earlier in my career, I found that the senior faculty did a great job of protecting me. And so they really protected me as a junior faculty member. And then when you become senior, though, they're like, well, we don't have to protect you anymore. You're on your own, you know, and you get pushed into the water like a duckling, right? And that's, I find as a senior person, that for me has been the hardest, because nobody's protecting you. You have to protect yourself. And you also feel like you want to protect the junior faculty. So you're protecting yourself, you're protecting the junior faculty, you're protecting everybody, and somehow yourself is the one that gets the short end of the stick, right? But for me, it's been much more difficult as I've become more senior. As a junior person, you can always say, you know, I get it, I need to publish, or I don't, you know, publish or perish, right? But as a senior faculty, they look at you a little bit different. You're different. They can ask you. They have no sense of protection.
Yeah, that's a good insights. Thank you so much. You know, we also have to keep in mind that people, our participants come from very different institutions, and in some institutions, publish and perish is not the only thing. You also have to contribute, right? Like a lot in the programs, in the teaching, etc. So, you know, but knowing how to say no or knowing who to ask, it's definitely like a very, very good tip. So let's see, Robin, what our participants said about what is their main barrier. And you can all see this pool here. The number one barrier, which is very interesting, and it really hasn't come up much, is politics. And the second one is competences and skills. And women, with this, what Becca and I were referring to is sometimes, you know, you really, really want to publish in SMJ, but you feel like you don't have the training, or you don't have like, you know, like the craft to do that. And you feel like, so you don't have like the skills or the competency, whether they are, you know, qualitative skills or quantitative skills or the language, and that those are impediments. But anybody wants to react to this question, and then I'll turn it to Becca about politics as a female.
Can I just make one observation?
Yeah.
If 90% of the participants in this session had been men, I think the answer might have been different.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm wondering, it might be that that the participants feel, or realistically don't have the competencies and skills if they want to publish an article, but it might also be that it's an internal barrier that they feel they don't have the skills.
But we know, I think we know from psychology research that women feel a lot less competent, right? Than, I mean, I'm not in that field, than men, and probably that reflects that. And again, this is probably the initial comment from Sharon, that sometimes our worst enemies are ourselves. And then politics, I think it feels, you know, we phrase politics in a very general term, but it can refer to, you know, different aspects, from sexual harassment to discrimination to feeling not a same partner as male. But I think I'm gonna turn it to Becca for the next question. That it's a nice segue from this.
Yeah, so this is actually, I have a variety of questions that I'm going to try to piece together because I think they're related, and this is a good segue. So I'm getting questions about how do you avoid the comparison trap. I got a comment about imposter syndrome. I think we all got a comment about we'd like to see the panelists own their success. And so this is maybe less of a targeted question and more just, these are some comments / questions we're getting from participants, and I'd like to hear the comments from the panel on them.
I could comment on the comparison piece. I mean, I think this is something I think it's easy to get caught up in, especially as a junior scholar, that look, so-and-so did X and so-and-so did X. And I kind of liken it to stepping on the scale. There's never good news, right? It never says what you want it to say. And so early on, I sort of stepped away from trying to make that comparison to other colleagues. We all have different paths. We all have kind of a unique agenda. And I sort of really made an effort as just trying to focus on my research, sort of trying to get it through the queues, all that stuff, and thought about the research as kind of your currency in the field, no matter where you're at. Wherever, whatever, and it's also helping your mobility. So that's something that you own and that you can control. You can control some of it, right? So I think trying to move away from that comparison and not getting caught up in that, because it can really sort of potentially drag you down or have negative connotations as opposed to positive ones.
I have a saying. I have a saying that fits what Tammy says, and it's like, never compare your insides to somebody else's outsides, right? Because you're always comparing everything you know about yourself to what somebody else is projecting. So that's, I just say that all the time, and I say it to myself, I say it to friends, like, never compare your insides to somebody else's outsides.
I think I would like to join here, because I think Tammy has a very good point that you know, you are unique, and each person is unique, and you need to find what is unique about what you're doing, and try to avoid this everybody is kind of commensurated on the same scale kind of thing, so that, you know, this better and less good, and so I think that we need to identify our own paths and our own research agendas, which are not placing us in comparison with others. It's different. It's yeah, I guess we're in strategy, right? You need your unique competitive advantage, which is by finding somewhere where no one else is.
No, I was going to add that I think rather than thinking of it as a comparison trap, maybe we can think more of looking for role models or people that you look up to. And again, I agree, we're all unique and everybody has their own path, but it doesn't mean that there can't be people that you can say, and what can I learn from you and your path, and how can that help my path, right? So I think that's helpful too. So I think the idea of mentors is really important, or at least it's been important for me, that there are some people that you can turn to and reflect on. I'm learning from listening to the other panelists here. So I think that's nice.
So another question that we got was, did all of you feel like you had strong or good or helpful mentors? And do you think this is essential to becoming successful as a scholar? So one sort of a secondary comment to this question was, what about those of us who aren't in that situation?
How to find a mentor, kind of.
Or what to do if you're starting out and you're not necessarily in the best mentoring position early on in your career.
I think I could say something. I think if an alternative to having a mentor is finding a community of, so And when I started my career, I really didn't worry about that. I said to myself, well, I'm doing the research that I'm doing. It doesn't matter if nobody else is interested in it. I can just do it. But I think I came to realize how much difference it makes if you can find like-minded people, you can get together, you start by organizing a symposium at the Academy of Management with people who are doing work that is similar to yours. You start working from there on maybe on a review paper, maybe you organize a small workshop. I mean, these things can grow. And I think that finding a community where you are able to support each other, you know, you create your own mentors. So I think that that's an alternative that you can work with. And it's something that's worked for me.
I would agree with Anne's remarks, and I would say that it's also important to try to have a person, some person in your institution that you can go to sort of for advice, right, about the internal operations of the institution. That might not be someone in your department, it might not be someone in the business school, it could be somebody in a different college, but someone within the institution that you feel sort of a trust connection with, that you can sort of approach with some challenging questions. And then separate from that, I think sort of the community piece is incredibly critical, and whether that's a small community of your cohort and you're always going back to them, or if it's the broader community, and I would encourage both the broader community in terms of your research area, as Anne has described.
No, I'd like to agree with that, and I think also I often meet junior faculty who are very concerned, or PhD students very concerned with building relationships with senior faculty, and I think those relationships that you develop early in your career are so important because they will stay with you as you develop through your career. And there are also people that you can spar with and ask questions, you know, I'm faced with this difficult situation, how would you handle it? And I think it's also great advice to have someone, maybe even in a different department or at a different institution. Sometimes you're faced with issues. And I think, if I think about my own career, I've had mentors, but I probably could have relied even more on them. So I think I'm someone who's had a tendency to think, oh, I need to do this on my own. I'm not going to ask for help. And so I think if I was going to give my younger self advice, I would say ask for more help. Ask for advice on the R&R or this difficult situation. If people brought up politics, if there's something at your institution, ask for advice. How would you deal with this situation? And I think most people are very happy to help out.
So I agree with all the comments that we've had. I like the notion of community a lot because I think for me, I certainly had my community that I was very embedded in. But, you know, oftentimes I think when we hear this notion of mentor, we think of it as being this one-way street. And it's not a one-way street, it is a two-way street. I've seen people that I think are absolutely unmentorable, and you know, that's worth keeping in mind. And the other thing is, you know, if you're not giving something back to that other person, if that other person doesn't feel like that's a worthwhile relationship for them as well, if it's always just one way, it's going to be pretty short-lived anyhow. So it is ask for advice, but it's also you need to be there as well, right? You need to be present in the relationship as well. And I don't think one precludes the other. I guess that's my feeling is I think having a mentor is really great. I think it's important. I had a mentor that I could ask all kinds of goofy questions to and did. But I also had a community. And so I think having both pieces is important because they bring different things to your life. But I think you can never forget that you also have to bring to that relationship. You also have to bring to that community. So it's not a one-way street. It very much is a two-way street.
So another question that we got in the pre-registered questions, and I've seen it here, is in the live questions as well. And we heard this in the Women's Networking Breakfast at SMS for those of you who were able to attend. How have you approached balancing all of your different roles as a woman, and I'm going to broaden that and say as a whole person. There are men in the audience, and this applies to them as well, in terms of being a scholar, but also meeting the needs of your family and the needs of your community, and however else you sort of define who you want to be as a person. How have you balanced all of those roles?
I can say something. I have a husband and I have one daughter. And I had my daughter after working in the private sector, public sector for 6 years, and just at the beginning of my PhD. And my PhD took 8 years. So I started late. I mean, that's the way I managed it. I just started late as an academic. I think I was 38 when I got my PhD. So that was, and then it was okay. My daughter was of an age that was okay. But if you have more children and you have a bigger family and not so much support from your spouse, my husband is an academic also, that helps actually a lot. Because it gives free time and more flexibility. So that's my story. I mean, I don't have any, so this is not a recommendation, it's just a life story. Yeah.
Any others?
Yeah, I could pitch in. I think it's difficult, right? Because there are lots of things that have to add up, and it depends what the situation is at home, right? I happen to have a husband who's very supportive. I think I told you, Rebecca, today I taught this morning, and then I had to run home. I have a sick son at home, and then my husband came home, he was teaching, and then I ran back to be at this webinar. So there's always things that you have to juggle. If you also have things going on outside. But to me, it's something that I prioritize. I want to spend time with my family. That's very important to me. And I happen to be in a country and an institution where that's okay. So, you know, the individual have to think about what's important to them and how do they balance these things. It's also important to me that I live in an area and in a place where I feel okay with having some things going on outside of my work. But again, there are some people for who that's not, I think it's about identifying what's important to you as an individual or as a whole person, as you said, Becca. I think that's a good way of describing it. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult to be productive and successful in your work, because we can spend 24 hours a day in our offices, and over time, I think we would just become drained and unsuccessful.
Any others?
I'm so hesitant because I feel like I have zero balance in my life. So I have no advice to give to anyone whatsoever. So so I'm going to pass the baton to Tammy.
So I would say that I think this balance, I have not yet met someone who said, "Oh yeah, I have balance," right? I've hit I have it completely sort of worked out, and so I go back to sort of the notion of what are your priorities, right? Sort of as Louise said, sort of what matters more, and sometimes you have to make a difficult trade-off. You know, your family matters more, and you can't do that one thing that you maybe wanted to do, but you just didn't have the option that time, and that's it. Whether that's missing a conference or a workshop, or maybe not having as much prep that particular day for class. You sort of, you know, it ends up being this sort of managing that piece. I don't have children, so I haven't sort of experienced that. I can imagine the challenges in terms of, as assistant professor with a young child or multiple children and managing things. But I think it does come back to priorities. And I think it also, Louise also pointed out that it's important to what kind of place you're at then has a huge influence on that sort of your whole person being content. Right? Because if you're at a place where, oh, I have to leave and sort of take care of, you know, my child for a few hours and then come back and that gets, people frown on that, well, maybe that's not the best fit then, right? So being mindful of those things, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I agree with Sharon on something that, you know, my life is not balanced or was not, but now I have a grandson. moves things back into perspective. And I think that perspective is important. You know, it's that having something else besides work to think about it is actually good, and it's part of being successful. And if you have to work 18 hours a day, I'm not sure that we could call that success. It's probably not.
I think that a few important things we are hearing here is, one, figuring out what's important to you and recognizing that's going to be different for different people. And I think we could also add that that may vary at different points in your life, which is consistent with the second point, which is, I think Tammy said, you know, sometimes it's about, and I don't think you use the word sequencing, but sometimes you're not going to have perfect balance across the areas of your life. Sometimes one thing is going to give, and then another time maybe it's something else. And so it's figuring out at any given point in time what you need to prioritize. So I think we're gonna get ready to wrap up, but we wanna ask the panelists to share a final word of advice. Anything you want to leave the attendees with as they think about either success specifically or, you know, moving forward in their careers more broadly.
I probably have something that I would like to say. One of the things that has helped me enormously is being in a university environment where their definition of success and mine kind of converged. And I went somewhere where I could do what I wanted to do, and they were fine with it. So, and that is not going to the most prestigious business school that would consider your file. It's not. So find, my piece of recommendation is find the place to be where you think that you can develop, be happy, and be recognized for what you do. And I have been so fortunate with that, and I wish it for everyone.
Thanks, Anne. Others?
I would like to agree with that, and also just say that I think the one thing I would like you to take away is just that it's a long career, and so the role that you're in will develop and your career will change. And I think one of you said at the beginning, it's about learning. And for me, I'm very concerned with this continuous learning, that I continue to develop and try new things and engage with new audiences and so on in different ways, be it in my research or in my teaching or outside of the institution. And I think all of those things help you develop over time, and you develop your career. And I think if people think of their career as static and are very concerned with the right now, then you can become very stressed about it. But I think you have to take a longer term perspective.
I would echo those same comments. I think it's, you know, it's a non-linear path. There's a sort of rocky roads, there's ups and downs. We get a lot of negative feedback in the review process. Just, you know, there's only so many articles get published in each journal each year. So embracing those small wins whenever something does happen. If you get submitted a paper, you sort of gotten through particular stages of your career trajectory. But it is evolution, and the way that I see it is I'm continuously learning, similar to what the other panelists have said. That's great. I think back of a space where I was before the PhD in working, and I didn't feel I was continuously learning. I didn't feel that I had the opportunity necessarily to do that. So we have kind of one of the best jobs out there, right? We have sort of, it's difficult, it's challenging, but I think that's why many of us are engaged in it, for that challenge and for pushing ourselves forward. So embrace it, enjoy the small wins, and sort of recognize that we haven't all gotten here because we went from straight line and had a set of goals that we set out at the beginning. It's been sort of very different roads for each and every person.
And for me, it's feel passionate about what you do, feel passionate about your research. You know, I've never been one of those people who could get on a research project and just because it was going to be a short publication or something, obviously, or I'd have a lot more publications today. But, you know, it was always, I feel so passionate about everything I work on. Everything I work on it because I love it. And that's what gets me through the ups and downs, because there's a lot of rejection, right? Very seldom have I gotten a paper published on the first try. Very seldom have I gone into a classroom and knocked everybody's socks off. You know, you have your downs, and the only thing that gets you through those are your passion and the love of what you do.
Thank you so much. So we've been here for an hour and we promise 45 minutes. So I wanted to, from the bottom of our heart, well, first of all, I want to thank you, all of you, for your insights, your candid remarks. And I want to thank Becca Quijo, because she actually led the entire initiative, so she put a lot of effort into it. So thank you, and thank you to Robin, who is hiding somewhere. But I think this webinar shows that, you know, a lot of us can interact and keep up the membership, you know, female membership, male membership, but, you know, keep up the membership at SMS in a more connected way. So that's super important. And just as a closing, I wanted to say that we'll have another one in the last 2 weeks of May. And I think that's it. Becca, you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for participating today, and we hope that everyone will join us in May. Again, these initiatives are really exciting for us, and we want to keep the energy going behind them. So thank you.
And thank you, Tammy, you know, Mary Louise, and
organizing.
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah.
Yes,
thank you. And thanks for the thoughtful questions.
Yeah. So we'll have another one. We have another theme that is themes from some of the questions that we got. So it's going to be more targeted, but it's going to be in May, and we'll announce it soon. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful winter.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.